They assumed a small HOA fine would have me bowing down to their power-hungry wishes unaware that they just singled out the chief of police. But what do I do when I discover their illegal racket going after our community's hard-working first responders and come to the conclusion that the hunter needs to become the hunted? Welcome to my channel. Comment below where you're viewing from. I'll never forget that morning. It began just like any other day, but went on to forever alter our entire neighborhood as I stepped outside into my car, prepared for another day spent at the police station. I noticed something bright green tape under my windshield wiper. Initially, I thought that it was just another restaurant takeout menu, but my heart fell when I opened it up and saw that it was an HOA violation. Notice $79 for improper lawn maintenance. You got to be kidding me. I stood there in uniform, coffee in hand, staring at my lawn. It looked exactly the same way that it had for the last 15 years that I'd lived there. The grass was green, healthy, and had been recently mown. Sure, maybe it wasn't perfect like a golf course, but it was neat and well-maintained. That's when I heard the unmistakable click of high heels on the sidewalk. Good morning. The sugary sweetness of her voice was tempered by an edge that made my teeth ache. Karen Mitchell, our newest member of the HOA board, was on her morning inspection stroll with tablet in hand. She'd only moved in 6 months ago and began campaigning for a position on the board right away. Now, 3 weeks into the job, she was making everyone's life a misery. Miss Mitchell, I nodded curtly, holding up the notice mind, explaining this my lawn complies with all reasonable standards. She hardly glanced up from her tablet. Section 7, paragraph 3 of the HOA rules explicitly says that grass may not be more than 3 and yours is roughly 3 1/2. And she said this as she tapped at her screen, likely documenting some other violation. Somewhere I breathed deeply, recalling my training and handling difficult people. I've been fairly busy this week with a big case at work. I'll cut at this. Weekend rules are rules, she chirped at last, glancing up. The fine doubles if not paid within 72 hours. Oh, and you might consider doing something about those garden gnomes. They're not on the approved decoration list. My garden gnomes, the ones my recently deceased wife had been gathering. I felt my blood pressure rise, but maintained a steady voice. I didn't know we required approval for garden decorations, which have been here more than a decade. New board, new rules. She brandished her tablet. Happily, we're bringing this neighborhood into the modern age. No more tacky decorations, depressing property values. As she tapped away down the sidewalk, I spotted her pausing at neighbor Sarah's house next door. Sarah was a nurse who'd just come off a tough night shift. The last thing she needed was Karen's morning nagging about her trash. Ken being out too long. I saw Karen begin snapping pictures of Sarah's property, and something clicked inside of me. This wasn't about my yard anymore, or my gnomes. In my 25 years on the force, I'd learned how to recognize harassment patterns and abuse of authority. Karen wasn't being strict. She was singling out residents. Back in my car, I got out my phone and began browsing the neighborhood Facebook group. Complaints against Karen were mounting. Mark, the firefighter on the corner, had been cited for his kids' basketball hoop. The elderly couple across the street received a violation for their unauthorized rose bushes. Even the local teacher had been cited for parking his car at his own driveway because it was too old and ugly. I was getting ready to leave my driveway when I saw Karen taking further photos of my gnome. She didn't know it yet, but she had just made a grave error. See, being police chief had taught me one very valuable thing. Sometimes the greatest crimes are not those that hit the headlines, but the insignificant ones which take away incrementally at a community spirit. As I arrived at work, my brain was already considering an action plan. Karen believed that she possessed all the control, but she had no concept of who she was actually working against, or what I would learn when I began probing into her flawless facade. 2 days from discovering that absurd lime green ticket, I could hardly believe my eyes there. There were 2 black SUVs with HOA security emblazoned on the sides, completely covered my driveway. I had just gotten off a horrific double shift responding to a bank robbery downtown. All I wanted to do was park my vehicle and catch some rest, but no, Karen Mitchell had other ideas. I sat in my windshield, watching her sashay across my front yard in her business suit, tablet in hand, snapping pictures of everything from my garden hose to my welcome mat. Each flash of her camera raised my blood pressure a notch or two, but I maintained my cool. 20 years on the force, a lesson being that losing your temper never fixes anything. Sorry, I yelled out, stepping out of my vehicle. You're blocking my driveway. and I had to get to my garage. Karen spun around, her hair perfectly styled blonde to swishing. It seemed like a shampoo commercial. Well, if it isn't Mr. Johnson, our neighborhood's most avid rule breaker. She tapped her tablet with her long red nails. Let's see, unpaid fine for lawn height infractions. Unapproved placement of garden gnomes. And now she hesitated for dramatic effect. Non-regulation mailbox color. I couldn't help but chuckle. Non-regulation mailbox. Color. The mailbox is white. It's remained that way for the 15 years that I have lived here per our new guidelines, which were approved last week. All mailboxes have to be painted pristine pearl white from the Anderson Paint Company collection. Your mailbox is obviously classic white, a very different hue. She grinned, as if she just cracked a great murder. Mister, I took out my phone and began to record. Karen, I know you're new to the area, but these security vehicles are illegally parked. They're obstructing access to my property, which is against City Ordinance 2345. Her smile flashed for a split second. I have absolute authority as HOA board member to impose our community's standards. These security officers, she waved at two men in rumpled uniforms parked beside their SUVs, are here to provide compliance. That's when I did a double take on something strange on their badges. They were almost like real police badges, but not really. As chief of police, I was familiar with every licensed security firm in our jurisdiction, and Mitchell Security Solutions wasn't one of those. I held my breath and thought maybe I'd try reason one more time. Look, I understand you're attempting to keep property values up, but clogging up someone's driveway over a $79 fine isn't unreasonable. It's illegal. I'd rather not have to take this higher. Karen's face, when the same shade as her nails, is that a threat, Mr. Johnson? Because I have pictures showing every infraction on your property, and the HOA board will be highly interested in your irritated demeanor. She approached the security guards. Take note of his threatening demeanor as they struggled with their notepads. I caught sight of their shoulder tabs peeling off. They looked like they'd been copied at a local copy store. Something wasn't computing here, and my cop senses were kicking in big time. I pulled up the city's business license database on my phone, keeping an eye on Karen as she kept snapping photos of my property. 3 taps later, I had what I needed, or rather what wasn't. They're no licensed security firm in her name, or her brothers, whom I'd spotted at the previous HOA meeting sporting a very similar uniform. Just then, Mrs. Garcia next door came out of her house at a run in her nurse's scrubs. Chief Johnson, thank goodness you're here. They've been blocking my driveway as well, and I'm running late for my hospital shift. I closely watched Karen's face as she heard the word chief. Her eyes widened ever so slightly, and her tablet almost fell from her hands, but rather than backing down, she raised her chin. Up, your title here is irrelevant, Chief Johnson. HOA rules bind everyone the same. Now, if you'll pardon me, I have to record some more infractions before I process the rest of the fines on your uncooperative behavior. As she turned away, clipboard pressed to her chest like armor. I knew this was hardly over. In fact, it was only the start. I had a sense Karen's perfect HOA life was about to become a great deal more complicated, particularly once I began investigating precisely how these new security measures got approved. I did not anticipate that a routine lawn disagreement would reveal something so repugnant in our quiet community. It began when Sarah, nurse at the ER, who resides 3 houses away, knocked on my door at 6 a.m., stilling her scrubs and resisting tears. She had just completed a gruesome overnight shift working on a bus, crashed only to be greeted by her whole front yard covered in bright orange violation notices. Chief, she exclaimed, her hands trembling as she held up the stack of notices. They're threatening to put a lien on my house because my trash can remain outside an additional day while I worked a double shift during the crisis. The sight of this committed nurse who just spent 16 hours saving lives being harassed over trash cans made my blood rage. But Sarah wasn't alone. As I began inquiring around, additional information came forth. Mark, the fireman on Maple Street, presented me with citation after citation for his children's basketball hoop, the very same hoop that existed for 5 years without a complaint prior to Karen becoming a member of the board. The Martinez family was fine because their Christmas lights remained up 2 days beyond Karen's seemingly arbitrary deadline. They'd attended their grandmother's funeral that night. I sat at my kitchen table that night, spreading out all the complaints like puzzle pieces. The pattern was as plain as day. Karen wasn't being finicky. She was specifically targeting houses where people worked odd or long hours, first responders, nurses, doctors, firefighters, people who couldn't always be home. To spring to her every whim my police instincts took over, I began mapping out all the citations that were issued over the last 3 months. Because Karen gained control, the grouping of the violations created a definite pattern in and around emergency workers' homes and those who overthrew her in the HOA election. This wasn't just random, this was calculated intimidation. Then my phone vibrated a text from Tom, my deputy, who resided in the neighboring subdivision. Chief, you won't believe this. Recall that flooding debacle last spring. Just found out Karen's brothers. Business received the contract for drainage repair. Cost 3 times more than the other bids had quoted. I sat back in my chair contemplating how Karen laughed in my face earlier that day when I'd attempted to reason with her about my own fine rules, or rules, she'd said, without that smug smile ever departed her face. But I realized now these weren't rules, this was a power trip. And maybe something even worse, sinister. At that moment, my doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Chan from the house across the street, an elderly widow who'd lived there longer than anyone. Chief, she spoke in a whisper, looking over her shoulder nervously. I watched the mounting cameras on street lamps today. They didn't bother to ask permission, Karen assures us, of security, but they're all pointed at particular houses, including yours. My jaw clenched. Unauthorized surveillance in my jurisdiction. Now, Karen wasn't being a pain. She was possibly breaking the law. But I wanted more evidence before I could do anything. If I acted too fast, she'd play the victim, accuse me of abusing my authority as chief. As I walked Mrs. Chun home, spotted Karen in her driveway, speaking with 2 men I'd never met before. They were wearing uniforms from her brother's security firm. But there was something about them that didn't add up. My gut warned me there was more here, and in 20 years of police work, my gut had seldom been wrong. I shut my eyes, recalling what my mentor had always said: the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Karen had created a small kingdom of fear and intimidation for herself, but she'd done one fatal thing. She'd become too confident, too careless. She didn't know that while she was eyeing us, we were eyeing her too. The true question now was no longer merely one of halting Karen. It was one of bringing the entire rotten system she created to light. I glanced over at the mounting stack of evidence on my desk and knew tomorrow would be an extremely interesting day at the HOA emergency meeting, particularly when they found out who had just been appointed quietly to the county's Housing Authority Watchdog Committee. I couldn't sleep that evening considering how Karen been behaving towards all the people in our neighborhood. Something didn't sit well about the entire episode. Sipping my morning coffee, I recalled a valuable lesson from early in my career as a greenhorn cop. Follow the money. The security firm blocking my driveway had acted strangely keen to obey Karen's commands, and their uniforms appeared suspiciously fresh at work. I asked Jenny in our records unit to conduct a simple business check on the security firm Elite Neighborhood Watch Services. Within minutes, I was convinced the company had been registered just 3 months before Karen had joined the... Sometimes it just needs someone to stand up and tell the truth. I walked into that HOA meeting room with every bit of evidence carefully laid out in my folder. The room was full. I'd never HOA board. The owner's surname was the same as Karen's maiden name, and the company address referred to a P.O. box rather than an actual office. I passed by Sarah's place on lunch break. She was arriving home from her hospital shift, looking tired. Chief, she bellowed when she spotted me. They've left another notice this morning. I can no longer afford to be paying these fines on a nurse's wage. She produced a pile of violation notices, all signed by Karen, all referring to little-known HOA regulations that appear to target working-class people, in particular. Back at the station, I delved further into public records. Karen's brother, Tom Mitchell, had a history of failed security firms in 3 states. Each time complaints had been made regarding aggressive practices and unauthorized blocking of vehicles, but they'd always vanished before any investigation could be initiated. My next destination was the county clerk's office. The friendly clerk, Mrs. Rodriguez, assisted me in extracting HOA registration documents. For the past 6 months, leafing through the pages, I found just what I needed. Karen had never revealed her family relationship to the security firm when they bid on the HOA contract, which was openly a conflict of interest under the HOA's own rules. But the best gold mine of all came when I looked up Karen's home business registration. She'd been operating a daycare out of her garage, watching 6 children at a time. HOA rules specifically forbade commercial operations, the very same rules she'd been utilizing to recruit other neighbors to have home offices better. Yet she didn't have legitimate child care certification from the state. My phone rang with a text from Mark, the fire chief. You got to see this. He sent me pictures of Karen's security company vehicles parked in fire lanes throughout the neighborhood. As a fireman, he knew how risky this was. We could not get a truck through there if we needed, his message indicated. I spent the rest of the afternoon gathering my evidence. Property maps indicated Karen had extended her back fence 2 foot past her property line. Security camera video from my cruiser demonstrated her company had obstructed emergency vehicle access several times a HOAs. Financial records showed she'd been pressuring the board to raise fines and funneling all security contracts to her brother's business. The evidence was piling up, but I needed to be careful in how I presented it. Karen had city council friends, and I needed to ensure that everything was totally legal and well documented. I copied all the documents and kept them in digital and paper form. Years of working police had taught the importance of backups. Just as I was wrapping up, Officer Rodriguez burst into my office. "Chief, you won't believe this. That security company attempted to boot Dr. Thompson's vehicle from the emergency room entrance. He was running in for a life-critical surgery." My blood boiled, but I remained calm. This was the last piece I needed. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the wall of evidence I'd assembled. Karen had no clue what was headed her way in her haste to construct her little kingdom of power. She'd left a string of abuses that would astound even her allies on the HOA board. The question now was timing, when, and how to present this. Information for maximum impact. A text appeared on my phone screen. It was from one of my sergeants. Karen had just put in a proposal for increased security precautions. Emergency HOA meeting summoned for tomorrow evening. I smiled, knowing the ideal moment had just arrived. Sometimes the best investigations are the ones you sit back and allow your target to walk right into the trap they've laid for others walking into that HOA. Meeting, my heart racing, but I kept my expression calm. Karen stood at the front of the room wearing her designer suit, flagging her papers around, announcing her new neighborhood protection program. I listened while she went on about increasing security guards and installing cameras on all the streets. The entire room was weary of her regulations, but no one was brave enough to voice their opinion. I waited until she was done speaking about how we were going to protect our home values. Then, just as she began asking for votes, I raised my hand. The comfortable pressure my badge in my back pocket gave me the courage. "Before we vote," I said, rising slowly, "I think there's something everyone needs to learn about." Karen's eyes scanned. "Not seeing me out of uniform, I'm Chief Anderson, and I've been looking into some troubling matters." I pulled out my own set of papers, property records, business licenses, and pictures of projector word on revealing Karen's illegal home business arrangement. In plain sight, these photographs depict an unlicensed daycare operation being conducted out of your house. "Mrs. Mitchell, that's against both HOA regulations and state law." Karen's face reddened. "How dare you? This is private property. Public records aren't private." I spoke, quietly switching to the next slide. "Neither is this business registration indicating your brother operates Safe Shield Security, the same business, now patrolling our streets without a proper license." The room was filled with whispers. I went on. "While you've been cited, Sarah Thompson, our local ER nurse, for leaving her trash cans out an hour extra after her night shifts. You've been operating an illegal business." While you cited Mark Rodriguez's children for their basketball hoop. Your security business has been operating without allows. Mrs. Chun from down the street stood up. "She gave me $200 for my Chinese New Year decorations." Others chimed in about their accounts of Karen's selective harassment. Karen attempted to take her papers and barge out, but the HOA president, Mr. Jenkins, blocked the door. "Not so fast. Karen, we need to talk." I presented evidence of each unjust fine, each fabricated rule, and each double standard. The room became increasingly louder with each revelation. Parents who've been F for their kids' chalk drawings spoke out. Senior citizens explained how they'd been harassed over their bird baths and garden gnomes. And here's the worst part. One said, revealing the last slide, the security company had been blocking driveways and running tickets without any legal right to do, so that impersonating a cop, that's a crime. Karen's ideal mask finally broke down. "You can't do anything. I was making this community safer. These people need rules. Rules apply to all of us." I answered, "including you." The room erupted into applause. Mr. Jenkins requested an emergency vote, and hands shot up throughout the room. Karen wasn't only taken off the board, she was banned from ever being on again. Because she finally pushed her way past all of us to get out, she turned around with tears of rage in her eyes. "This isn't done," she yelled. But looking at our united neighbors, I knew it was sometimes justice wears a badge, and noticed so many neighbors arrived before Karen sat down at the front table, pounding away at her tablet as if she owned the place. She didn't even glance up when I arrived. "Before we vote for the new security initiatives," I spoke, standing from my chair in the back, "I'd like to speak to board." Karen's head whipped up, her eyes squinting. As I proceeded to the front, "For those who do not know me, I'm James Mitchell. I resided here for 15 years, and I'm the chief of police for our city." The whispers began. Immediately, Karen's tea fell out of her hands, clattering on the table. I saw her brother, the owner of the security company, fidgeting uncomfortably in his seat by the door. In the last 3 months, there have been 47 fines imposed in our community. 35 of them have been issued to first responders and essential workers. I took out my first bit of evidence, a color-coded map displaying every house seen, note any pattern. The board members leaned forward, examining the clusters of red dots. Mrs. Thompson, our retired school principal and longest serving board member, pushed her glasses back up with shaking hands. But that's not the end of it. I kept pulling out more papers. A security firm contracted to serve these citations, Mitchell Security, LLC, isn't only unlicensed, but operating illegally under our state's private security contractor statute. Karen's brother stood up to leave, but 2 uniformed police officers I had stationed at the door were already waiting. Karen leapt to her feet. This is absurd. You can't utilize police resources for personal agendas. You're right, I smiled. That's why all the information I am showing you tonight is from public records and lawful sources, such as the documents indicating your home-based business that infringes Section 7 of our HOA agreement. The room exploded. Neighbors began sharing their own stories. A single mom who got fined for Christmas lights in January while she worked double shifts. The elderly couple targeted for their medical equipment. Delivery van, the kindergarten teacher cited for kids' chalk drawings on her own driveway. Mrs. Thompson stood up, her voice cutting to the turmoil. I went on to instantly oust Karen Mitchell from the board and order a complete audit of all fines levied under her authority. Second 5 voices shouted in unison. Karen's face was red, turning white. You can't do that. I was upholding property values. I was upholding standards. No, I said softly, you were bullying people who didn't have time to stand up for themselves. But all that stops today. The vote was unanimous as Karen stormed out, her designer handbag flailing wildly. Neighbors began hugging each other. Sarah, the ER nurse who'd received 8 citations, was sobbing as she hugged Mark, the firefighter who'd lost his kid's basketball hoop. I worked late assisting Mrs. Thompson to begin the paperwork for refunding all unjustified fines. We uncovered more than $115,000 worth of citations, each one more absurd than the previous one. As we worked, neighbors continued to stop by with coffee treats and tales of gratitude. The following morning, I drove to work by Karen's residence. A moving truck had already in her driveway. Her brother's security vehicles were also missing, replaced by legal patrol vehicles. Ensuring the moving company was properly permitted, word spread fast around the neighborhood. Folks started coming out again. Children played in their front yard without fear of getting written up, and Mrs. Thompson had a community barbecue to celebrate the return of good sense. But the best part came 7 days later. I was watering my lawn, precisely 3, 5 in tall, when Sarah's daughter came running with a homemade card. Tucked inside was a crayon drawing of me in my uniform, standing in front of a rainbow-colored house. The note read, "Thank you for making our neighborhood happy again." That card now sits on my desk at the station, reminding me that sometimes the most critical police work gets done right at home. Our community learned a worthwhile lesson. It's not about having power, it's about how you use it. And as for Karen, last I heard, she attempted to get on another HOA board 2 towns over. But in some way or another, they had already heard everything about her experience with us. Information contained in this video is for entertainment and informational purposes only. HOA laws and regulations differ by state and neighborhood.